But if you're asking me to say, is there another collection in sport anything like this one? Well, there can't be.
Owens wins in 10.3. Second, Miss South America.
Could Spurs become the first team this century to win both league and cup? That was the question.
If you're defining the Priory Collection, it's about Britain's great sporting moments and past, including its social past.
Stop in England. This time a chance came to West Ham's Jeff Hurst. It's the equaliser!
You want people to see it, hear the story, and be transported back to that moment.
Well, in 1985, when this adventure started, it was just sort of, well, I like that, I like that, I like that. Probably 50–60% of what we bought, should never buy. Ridiculous mistake. But when you set off, you're not setting off to build a collection, it just evolves. Today, I only want something that's unique, something that's the first, something that's the last, something that's iconic. You know, I'm not interested in anything else.
The Priory Collection is made up of items covering over 150 years of unforgettable moments from the sporting world. The majority of them live at the home of Saracens Rugby Club in North London.
Today, more and more so, the collection is at Allianz Park because there's big stands there and room to house it. The most important thing about it is that it doesn't just stay in a cupboard. You know, you want people to see it. I say with their kids, but actually grown men drool over it.
One of the largest items in the collection is so big that hundreds of people could stand on it.
We're now in the bowels of the Saracens main stand, and this is known as the Olympic Bar. This is the warm-up track from the 2012 London Olympics. So Usain Bolt's been on this, Jessica Ennis has been on this, etc.
I suspect it's probably quite valuable, actually.
On the wall behind me, I mean, part of our pride and joy, I've always thought poster art is much neglected. But we have here an original poster from every Olympic game. So starting at the far end is 1896, which was the rebirth of the modern Olympics in Athens, and ending up in 2012. The reason I say 2012 London is unbelievably, we cannot locate a poster from Rio in 2016. And you think, well, there must be thousands, but we can't get one. It's amazing. So that's one thing we do want. We need a Rio poster.
The Priory may not yet have every Olympic poster, but they do have every Olympic torch since they were introduced at the 1936 Berlin Games.
If you're a collector, and there are a lot of people who love collecting, I mean, the only advice I would give is try and get something that there aren't 10,000 of. That's the Helsinki torch. That is the blue ribbon of torches, because for some unknown reason, they made only, I think, 11 or something like that, most of which are gone, the few of which are left are in museums. So that one is by miles the most valuable. If you're asking me what was the most iconic Olympic Games, it was Hitler, 1936. The birth of the Olympic torch, due to Hitler, not surprisingly, he liked all that sort of stuff, and what surrounded those games.
These controversial Olympics took place 3 years before the outbreak of World War II. With the eyes of the world on Berlin, Hitler saw this as an ideal opportunity to show off the physical superiority of the Aryan race. The perfect response came from black American athlete Jesse Owens, who stole Hitler's show in some style.
Owens is ahead. Sundberg and Bergmeier are fighting. Ozendorf challenges Rykov. Metcalf comes up, but Owens wins in 10.3.
Under pressure not to compete from fellow black Americans opposing the Nazi regime, and all too aware that back home he was still treated like a second-class citizen, Owens dominated the games, winning 4 golds and breaking 3 world records.
Yeah, this is an autograph book from the 1936 Olympics. But what's really significant is at the end of it, Jesse Owens signed it. Next to him is a gentleman called Joseph Goebbels, who became the Nazi information minister, probably the nastiest man of the whole lot. You know, Owens, Goebbels, wow. I'm not a big autograph collector, but that was special. That, to me, that's history. People who see that get pulled back to an age that they never saw, thank goodness, and hopefully will never see again.
How on earth did that happen? That, you know, two men, neither knew where history would place them, and there they are, good and evil, adjacent to each other.
Already one of the great Olympic stories, Jesse Owens' quadruple gold has one extra wonderful layer, thanks to the actions of his German long jump rival, Karl Lutz Long.
Owens had misjumped twice, so he only had one more to go. And Lutz, who was there to do Hitler's bidding, showed him what he was doing wrong, where he should jump from, which meant that Owens qualified for the final and beat Lutz into second place. It was a beautiful story of sportsmanship, and then Lutz himself died very early on in the Second World War, I think, whereas Owens went on for a long time, but was never ever invited to the White House. He was meant to have been snubbed by Hitler's Germany, but actually he probably had worse treatment back in America.
Prior to the inaugural modern Olympics in 1896, there were several attempts to revive the Hellenistic Games, including the annual Wenlock Olympian Games beginning in 1850. Just 2 medals that we know of remain, both made for the 1859 event, and they live in Allianz Park.
I think they were minted but not awarded, but I can't imagine there's any more of them. Great things about memorabilia for me, the great things, is true memorabilia. There was no point keeping it or fabricating it because it had zero value. Its value has only emerged 100, 150 years later, whatever it is. Nobody would ever forge something that had no value unless you're an idiot.
The Priory Collection is also proud to display many classic artworks, all on a sporting theme.
People understand stories, so when you talk about something and you have a story, people imagine the story. So a cricket bat's a cricket bat, but if it's the cricket bat that W.G. Grace used and was the last one before he died, and he didn't play cricket because he felt it was wrong to play the game when young men were dying in the First World War in trenches, the whole bat comes to life. And to me, that's what it's about. The story brings the object to life.
W.G. Grace is a true sporting icon. Having played at the top level for 44 years until his retirement in 1908, many credit him with inventing the modern game. For this reason, he's rightly known as the father of cricket.
In 1891, a 43-year-old W.G. Grace was persuaded by Lord Sheffield Shield, to go to Australia, and these are the actual balls used in the 10 games they played. And then that's the bat, which is the only documented surviving bat when he made 100. He made many hundreds, but that's the only one that's documented as surviving, and that was used on that tour in those games. Again, a fascinating story as to how Lord Sheffield was only going to put the tour on if WG came, because he was the guy the Australians turned up in their many tens of thousands to watch.
The Priory Collection is the proud home for much of W.G. Grace's legacy, as it is for several other legends of the game.
These 2 bats here encompass records that will never ever be passed, because that was the bat that Jack Hobbs went past Grace's record of 54,000 runs, and he ended up with 61,000 runs. Never ever going to happen, because we now play 2020, 1 day, and then they just played 3 day, 4 day, etc., etc. So that's a record that will stand forever, Hobbs' bat. And then there's the Australian equivalent, which is Justin Langer's bat, when he scored 28,000 runs and a few to go past Bradman's record. And again, I think for the same reason. With big bashes and 2020s, they're never going to play enough cricket that anybody will ever beat that record. So those records will probably stand forever. The painting, well, we all know who that is, the great man, Donald Bradman. Perhaps more interesting is the stump below. That is the stump that was behind him in 1930 when he scored 334 to set the world record score. And subsequently we've had it was signed by Len Hutton, who scored 365 in 1939, by Gary Sobers 366, Brian Lara, Matthew Hayden, so all the record scorers have signed it.
Donald Bradman was a key figure in one of cricket's most infamous Test series, the 1933 Ashes, known better as the Bodyline series.
I think the fast bowler, Gubby Allen, wouldn't do what Dick Jardine wanted, which was essentially bowl at the batsman and try and hit him. But the others obviously had to, because they were professionals, not amateurs, so they were reliant on the game for their income. And it was a very effective tactic.
With just the famous baggy green cap for protection, Aussie batsman Bert Oldfield fractured his skull when Harold Larwood bowled one of these infamous deliveries. That cap is now part of the Priory Collection.
We've actually got a lovely photograph of Harold Larwood and Bradman years later. Bradman, who got hit on the head by Larwood, that in the moment that probably defined the series, now old men, and that moment to me was actually very important, that many, many years later, there's no bitterness, there's no enmity, because actually sport in many ways is about the people you've known and about the memories that have been created.
The multicoloured hat is probably the most famous hat in history, because it's Douglas Jardine's Harlequin hat from the Bodyline series.
Jardine, wearing his famous Harlequin cap, without which England's captain is not complete, leads onto the field his, so far, unconquered team.
The significance of that hat I love is because obviously there was actually questions asked about it in the UK Parliament, because the Aussies had asked him not to wear it because it sort of smacked of empire and all that sort of stuff. And Jardine is reputed to have said, I love this, if they don't want me to wear that cap, I will wear it every day. He was a tough bugger. And the Bodyline series, of course, was just an amazing moment in history.
It wasn't just the Aussies who felt the force of Douglas Jardine's tough and controversial approach. English batsman Eddie Painter no doubt thought his series was over when he was hospitalised with tonsillitis.
It was so interesting because Jardine literally got him out of his hospital bed, to come and bat as ill as he was, and Painter did it, and then what a fairy tale ending. He hit the ball that won the game, that won the Ashes, that won the Bodyline series. And a typical Jardine gesture, sort of pull yourself together, man, get out of that bed and come and bat.
Headingley, 21st of July 1981. One of the most memorable days in Ashes history. With England down and out on the final day of the third test, odds against their winning the game had slipped to an incredible 500 to 1. One swashbuckling Ian Botham innings and one Bob Willis bowling rout later, they were celebrating a stunning 18-run win. The Aussies were shell-shocked, but for two of them, at least there was a silver lining.
Rod Marsh and Dennis Lilly had a small bet on at 500 to 1 and cleaned up. I'm sure they'd rather not have cleaned up, but a great story nonetheless.
We all say it's Botham's test match, but it was actually 8 for 43. It was Bob Willis's test match. But it's great to have the two things reunited, the bat and the ball that achieved the miracle of Headingley.
We all knew it was a phenomenal test match and never seen before, but it's become iconic. You almost need to go through the passage of time. The 1960 tied test match in Brisbane, West Indies, Australia, that was a phenomenal tour because it reignited cricket and the West Indies got a ticker tape reception in Australia. But did we know that that was an iconic moment? Well, we knew it was the first tied test match in history, but it's become iconic with the passing of time and the passing of the people who played in that game. Because that actually makes it much more, emotional, I suppose. That is the ball thrown in the first ever tied test match at Brisbane in 1960. This is quite significant. It's signed by Frank Worrell, the first black captain of the West Indies in 1960. FCM Alexander, the last white captain of the West Indies. He was a wicketkeeper. The Reverend Wesley Hall, the fast bowler with the chain that jangled as he came in, fearsome sight. And then I was fortunate enough a few years ago to be having lunch with a really, really nice, outstanding man called Richie Benno. And I realised that he was the captain, so I got him to sign the ball on the other side, just to complete the dramatic actors of that arguably most famous Test match in history, because it actually reignited cricket. It was the first ever tied Test match in history after 100 years of Test cricket.
In a collection full of surprising items, this piece of paper from 1869 is perhaps the most surprising of the lot.
Charles Dickens, huge cricket fan, had a ground outside his house, used to umpire there, and was a great supporter of the cricket club, Gad's Hill. And we've got a subscription list from 1869, just a scrubby piece of paper. Why would that have been kept? Why? Anyway, the guy who donated most was, and is signed by him, is Charles Dickens and family. And I think it was 5 guineas he put in. And then, interestingly enough, the bottom of about 5 subscribers, because it's only a scrubby piece of paper, is the Earl of Darnley, who put in a couple of quid. And of course, the Earl of Darnley was the dad of the Hon. Ivo Bligh, who was given the burnt bale that was the ashes. So that sort of, completes the circle, if you like.
What we have here is a display of really old, iconic rugby caps. You've got first ever Springbok cap when they started playing 1891, but probably the gem is 1884, the first time New Zealand played at all. Very rare because they held the cap in such reverence, they were all buried with it, so by definition, very, very few survive. The first cap you get representing your country must be absolutely huge when you're handed it and you think, wow, a moment ago I was a schoolboy and now I'm actually going to run out for my country. It must be an amazing feeling.
When New Zealand first played in 1884, they wore a black top with white shorts. But when they donned black shorts in 1905, the All Blacks were born.
This is quite interesting because this shirt is Dave Gallagher's shirt, who was the first captain of the All Blacks, and a man who was a hero. Even though his brother had already died in the First World War, he falsified an age so he could go and fight, and he died at Passchendaele. So he actually gave his life, and there's a statue of him at Auckland, and I know that the All Blacks, when they come over here, they visit his grave. He's that important. And actually that shirt tells you a lot about the All Blacks. You'll see just slightly above it, there's a picture of Jonah Lomu, who I was fortunate enough to have breakfast with 2 or 3 weeks before he died. And you can see the reverence. He wanted a selfie of himself with that shirt, because that shirt to the All Blacks is the shirt. It's their first ever All Blacks captain. When I approached Jonah Lomu with that shirt, this lovely big man retreated from it. He visibly retreated, because the All Blacks hold their shirts in such reverence. They believe that their duty is to pass on the honour of that shirt as they go through, which is probably why, without doubt, they're the greatest side in history. Next to it is Jonah Lomu's own shirt from 1995, when we all remember him running over England. I remember setting out to watch that game full of enthusiasm, and I was out in the garden after 20 minutes because I think we conceded, run over about 3 tries in no time.
The Priory Collection also has the 2 other original tour shirts that make up the Southern Hemisphere Holy Trinity.
That was an original Springboks when they were called the Springboks for the first time in 1906-07. And then behind me, it looks white, but it was blue. It is the first Australian shirt of 1908. So that completes the first 3 Southern Hemisphere tours. I don't know of anybody else who has another one of those shirts. We've only ever seen one, ever. The Australian shirt was worth far more to me than anybody else because I've got the other 2. And once again, you need the 3 pieces together, I think. This is a sort of corner that we actually call Mandela, Munich, Muhammad Ali, because there's Ali stuff. Obviously Henry Cooper's gloves. They were the first gloves to put Ali on the canvas. And that's special, you know, the first person ever to put Ali on the canvas, and these were the gloves. Well, what's on the subject of Ali, I find quite amazing, is the photograph of Ali and Mandela, who of course was a boxer in his youth. But to me, to have those 2 guys, 2 of the greatest figures ever, one being world champion and the other being a world champion bloke, Mandela, symbolically squaring up to each other, signed by both of them, that to me is what makes it exciting. This is about President Mandela, who we were fortunate enough, through Francois Pienaar, who captained South Africa in 1995, the Mandela World Cup final, because he wore the number 6 hated Springbok shirt, which the blacks would not wear, and he wore it to unite his country. It brings lumps to your throat. That wasn't just about rugby, that was about the sort of rebirth of a country and an extraordinary man. This is his actual handprints. It's not a print, it's his actual handprints that we were lucky enough to be given. Next to it is a Saracen shirt from 1999 that I don't think he did wear, but he certainly got it and signed it for us. And then above is an original painting of Good Luck Bokke, which was the plane that flew over Johannesburg just over the stadium before in 1995, and signed by Francois the captain, President Mandela, and Laurie Kay, the pilot, who has since passed away. So that's absolutely unique. And then a picture of President Mandela and the 3 gentlemen who served 27 years with him in Robben Island, signed by all 3 of them, with President Mandela, obviously when they were all old men, but special.
One of the newest additions to the collection is the ball from that legendary 1995 final that saw South Africa, on home soil, overcome the might of Jonah Lomu and his All Black teammates. It was donated by South African centre Brendan Venter, who managed to get it from a particularly enterprising ball boy.
Brendan, he obviously went up to the ball boy and said, can you give me the ball? And the ball boy said no. So they had to have a bargaining session in which he swapped his socks and whatever it was and boots for the ball. And then he got the ball signed by the Springbok side. Then Brendan being Brendan, it stayed at the bottom of his cupboard for about 20 years, just there. And of course is now at Allianz Park alongside the 2003 ball.
This Welsh jersey was worn by one of the game's earliest superstars, Ben Gronow, when he kicked off the very first international game played at Twickenham in 1910. 100 years later, Johnny Wilkinson kicked off Twickenham's centenary match, and this is his shirt from the game.
In terms of looking after the collection, probably not as much care goes into it as should, but we do measure the humidity and obviously keep a very close eye on things. For example, the very, very expensive, unique stuff is in a cabinet which I'm reliably told would take you and I 45 minutes with a hammer to smash the glass in. So they shouldn't be able to do that. Right at the end, you've got Nobby Stiles' shirt from '66. But the symbolic nature of it is that there's his shirt from '68, which was the first time an English side, Manchester United, won the European Cup final. And he's the only guy with 2 shirts from both, because Bobby Charlton was the only other guy to play in both. But his shirt from the West Germany final has disappeared, no one knows where it is. So those 2 shirts are unique.
Manchester United's 1968 European Cup final victory over Benfica was memorable not just because they were the first English team to lift that trophy, but more poignantly, it came almost exactly 10 years after 8 players were among the 23 fatalities of the Munich air crash.
Why it survived, I've got no idea. We think it's the last thing that side ever signed, which was a dinner menu at the Belgrade airport, signed by all of them. And you think, well, why did that survive? I don't know where it came from. Oh, I think I do. I think the ambassador had it. They signed it for him. I think that's right. But then how on earth it found its way, to our collection, I don't know. I think it was Bill Foulkes and Bobby Charlton who both played in the '68 final when Manchester United won the European Cup and were the first English team ever to win the European Cup. And the poignancy they must have felt, because it was almost literally 10 years after the Munich air crash.
One of the many memorable results from this United team came in an FA Cup game against a bewildered Northampton Town, who they beat 8-2, thanks primarily to Old Trafford legend George Best.
He'd been out injured for quite a while, and he made his return against Northampton and scored 6 goals, which was amazing.
And the shirt he wore whilst thumping in his double hat-trick now hangs proudly amongst the rest of the Priory's Manchester United memorabilia.
I've always liked that phrase, Maradona great, Pelé better, George Best. And that's what he was. Brilliant.
In 1971, after a brief second spell in charge, Matt Busby retired as a true United legend. Few thought they would ever see a manager to rival his achievements. And after Alex Ferguson's first game in 1986, a 2-0 defeat to Oxford United, no minds were changed. Which makes the survival of this scrap of paper all the more fascinating.
It's the handwritten team for Manchester United that he obviously put on the wall of the dressing room, his handwriting, his first team ever. Who on earth would have taken down the team list from a dressing room wall, that scrubby piece of paper, and then kept it? I find that amazing. Why would anybody have done that?
Away from Old Trafford, the Priory is also home to 2 very special sets of medals.
Could Spurs become the first team this century to win both league and cup?
The Spurs one arguably is the most important one because it was the first double of the century. Somebody might have done a double in 1890 something, but in a way the first double of the sort of modern era was Danny Blanchflower's side of 61. And they're Bill Brown, the goalkeeper's double-winning medals from that game.
The ball was centred. Dyson headed a great goal. Spurs had won the cup 2-0.
And then, of course, the next double was the other North London side, Arsenal, and that was the 1971 side. So it's kind of the pride of North London because it's the first 2 doubles of the century. But by definition, memorabilia terms, to be first is huge. To be second's not bad. But to be first is huge.
No other cup final, indeed nothing Wembley ever staged, matched the glamour of this event, the final of the World Cup.
The 30th of July 1966 is widely accepted as being the greatest day in our sporting history, when England won the World Cup on home soil after beating West Germany 4-2. With 32 million people glued to their televisions, it still holds the record for the UK's most watched broadcast ever.
An English defensive lapse gave the ball to Haller, and that was it.
England were a goal down after 12 minutes, and then one man stepped up to leave his mark on the game. creating his legacy as an English sporting
To
icon.
West Ham's Jeff Hurst. It's the equaliser!
Well, here is Jeff Hurst's shirt from the 1966 World Cup final when he scored the hat-trick that beat West Germany 4-2 after extra time. That's the original shirt. It looks new, which amazes me. It looks like you could have bought it at JD Sports yesterday, but you didn't. And he is still, and in my opinion always will be, the only man to have scored a hat-trick in a World Cup final. And will anybody do it again? I doubt it. So it makes the shirt absolutely unique. And obviously in this country, that is iconic. And yeah, you look at it and it takes you back to the left foot pile driver when he scored the fourth goal.
Jeff Hurst saw an opening in the defence and achieved the hat-trick.
In a way, you've got to stare at it for a while for it to sink in and memories to come flooding back and images to come flooding in, rather than just walk past and say, wow, that's Jeff Hurst's shirt.
The Priory has a third shirt from this famous victory, which has added significance when displayed next to this jersey from England's 2003 Rugby World Cup victory.
These two shirts here, unique is an overused word, but they are unique. I've had George Cohen's shirt for some time. The white one is Ben Cohen's shirt from the 2003 World Cup final, which England won. You will have interpreted that they've both got the same name, and it's uncle and nephew. And that's what makes them overpoweringly unique, because I don't believe that will ever happen ever again in the history of mankind, because, you know, to have an uncle and a nephew in two different sports, completely different sports, winning a World Cup final, tell me when that's going to happen again.
Following England's win in '66, they were hot favourites at Mexico 1970. Bobby Moore's men were drawn in the same group as Pelé's Brazil. Despite losing 1-0 and having won the previous World Cup, Moore still said that this was the greatest game of football he ever played in.
The white shirt is Bobby Moore. The famous image of him and Pelé swapping arm in arm, swapping shirts, that's the shirt. It's got the original cigarette stains, because it was in a bar in Brazil for about 20-25 years, just up there in a bar. People have suggested getting it washed, but hey, his DNA's on that, his DNA's on that. If you tried to wash that shirt, it might disintegrate. So leave it.
Brazil went on to win the 1970 World Cup. And, of course, the Priory has Pelé's winning medal.
Where I think we've been lucky is because we've been doing it for 30 years, this collection can never ever be reproduced, because it's a series of one-offs of a number of sports. Because people often say, what's your favourite item? And the answer is, I don't have a favourite item, because it's the collection. It's all those items together, to me, is what makes it attractive. We all have to know where we've come from. We have to have a past, we have to have roots. And so you might say, well, this is a shirt worn by some footballer in 1890s, so what? Yeah, no, but it's part of our history, and we need roots. So that's what I think the essence of memorabilia is. I think so. We all need to have roots, and sport, of course, is a universal language and is part of everybody's roots.
I sometimes think that legacy is a slightly pretentious word, but actually, you know, it's going to be a legacy, because, I mean, touch wood, the collection will live long after me. And you sort of think, well, do I really care? I won't be here. And, well, I sort of do care, yes. So, you know, now it's a collection that I know I will keep it together. Obviously, I haven't got that much control of it when I'm up there, but it'll stay together as a collection, and people will admire it for hundreds of years, hopefully.